Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to a video about Unit 1, Area Study 1, Production Possibility Diagrams. I know we talked about this in the Lesson 2 video for this topic, but I know my class has forgotten that from commencement and wanted to look at it in a bit more detail. In that video, we really glossed over it. I'm going to look at a lot of the nitty-gritty about how to draw it, what they are, the kind of questions that you get asked about them, just to be really specific because it can be a pretty big part of Area Study 1. And so you obviously want to be able to do well at it and know that you are confident in answering things about it. So if you want to check back on anything else that we've done, there's a playlist for the whole Area Study 1 that is available for you if you just look on this page. But let's get straight into it and talk about what they are and why they're useful. So a production possibility diagram can also sometimes be talked about as a frontier or curve. So be ready to see different terminology pop up depending on where you're looking. But what it is the visual representation of the maximum output for a country who's only producing two goods or services. So what it ends up looking like, it ends up looking like a curve like this that's got a whole bunch of options on it. So we call them A, B, C, D, and E. And then often like on the axis, it'll be like production of, and I'll have a product and I'll have a different one on this axis. And so what it's saying for this is that at any point along this curve, is the country using their resources to their maximal ability? So it means you're using all of their resources to their maximal potential in a way that is still sustainable. So anywhere along that curve, you're using your resources and allocating them in a way that is maximizing the overall output. So maximal use is really important. So any point along that curve, maximal output. Another really important thing is it's assumed that both products cost the same to make and sell for the same price. That's really important because it just stops you getting confused about, well, maybe it's better if they make this because more people are going to want it. Same price, same cost to make, therefore it doesn't really affect the business which one they're making. They care about which one they can make more of or what combination they can make more of overall. Other things you need to know, so at any point inside the curve, and if we mark that down like this, so anywhere inside this area here, means the country is not being efficient. They're not producing to their maximal potential. Often, if we do that, we'll say mark a point inside the curve where the country is being inefficient, and we'll call that point F. That's pretty important to know because you're likely to get questions about it. Any point outside the curve means the country is producing in a way which is considered unsustainable. So that would be anywhere outside here. So if we're out in this area, it means the country is using their resources in a way that they can't keep up with in the long term, and often get asked to mark that with something like point G or anything. But if you have to mark something like that, that is what you do. And so let's get into the specifics of how you go about drawing them. So how to draw one, like we said before, you end up drawing a curve, looks something like this. It doesn't need to be exact to the data. Because the theoretical diagram, most diagrams we do in economics are going to be, you just, as long as it looks right, you're going to be able to get the marks for it. As long as it's fully labeled, that is really important. Then we're going to make the axes line up with what they are. So the important thing being that along these axes, the higher up you get, the more quantity there is. So if you go along the x-axis here, the further along you go, the more quantity there is. So at point A, we've got 0 tacos, but 200 burritos. So that means at point A here, means this y-axis is going to be the production of burritos. So if we make that the title for it, which is very important to have, so production of burritos, we have that perfectly there. Then so that makes sense that this one will then be production of tacos. Very important that we are doing it about Mexican food here because Mexican food is delicious, and in a lockdown there's no real good Mexican food that's in my 5K radius. So this works because then we see as we go along, so point A, we've got 0 and 200, that's probably about 40 and 150 at point B, point C, 100 and 100, D, 170, 150, and E, 250 and 0. So that's just the drawing of it, the specifics of it. If you have to do other things like mark a point where we're being inefficient, we'll call point F on the inside. Mark a point where we're being unsustainable, point G on the outside. That's what you need to do in terms of drawing it. Just label both axes, have a curve, then the letters for each production possibility point. Then in terms of other things you're going to get asked about, so if we draw that curve again, go A, B, C, D, and E. I'm just going to be quick on this one and be tacos and burritos, but remember to say production of, so burritos. So then, things you can ask about. So opportunity cost is the production lost when going with the next best alternative. Sometimes you'll get asked about the opportunity cost of moving, or like the opportunity cost of producing at a certain point. Most often I've seen they like to ask about the opportunity cost when you're putting all of your resources into producing one thing, which makes sense because it's the least confusing overall. So for example, if we had to talk about the opportunity cost at point A, so the opportunity cost of producing 200 burritos, if you're putting all of your resources into producing burritos, it means you can't put all of your resources into producing tacos. So that means that rather than being able to produce, when you produce 200 burritos, it means you can't produce 250 tacos overall. So that means the opportunity cost ends up being 250 tacos. When we look at trade-offs, we're looking at lost versus gained. So sometimes this is between time periods when we look at other theoretical questions, so in short-term, long-term, benefit versus loss. In terms of this, it's often the trade-off is just like when we move from one point to another, what the trade-off is. So if we move from point C to point D, we're just looking at what's gained and what's lost. So in this case it would be, well, we're gaining 70 tacos and we're losing 50 burritos. That is the trade-off. You don't need to go into any more further detail on that. You're just talking about the numerical value of what is being gained and lost. Then when we get to the cost-benefit analysis, it's all about what's lost versus what's gained. So it's the same thing there, but then deciding if you're better off. So are we better off? So in this case, we've gained 70 and lost 50. So we are 20 units better off. So in that case, from moving from point C to point D, you'd say we've gained 70 tacos, we've lost 50 burritos, and you'd write this in full sentences, obviously, but I'm trying to do this quickly while talking, which means that the country is overall 20 units better off. And this should make living standards better. So that's really important to be able to do. Then other things you might get asked about it, like we said before, the being inefficient or being unsustainable, important to be able to mark that as well. Sometimes you get asked things about how a country could move their production out to that point where they're being unsustainable. So if we call that point G, and that's always going to be through things like finding new resources, education and training, new technology means the country is able to increase their overall production possibility without it being unsustainable. Another final thing that you might get asked. So sometimes you'll get a question asking you at which point is a country maximizing their living standards? And in terms of this topic, some people can get confused about that because they're trying to think about, well, society wants a combination of the two of them. In terms of economics, we are worried about when they're making the most, when they're being the most efficient, because that is the optimal output. So in terms of this, if you get asked at which point are they being the most efficient or what's the optimum point for society, all you have to do is add up the columns. So that's 200, that's 190, that's 200, that's 220, and that's 250. And so we then know that point E is the optimal point because that is when they're producing the most overall, which means there's going to be the most economic activity, the most income occurring, and therefore the highest living standards for society overall. And that's pretty much it. It's how to draw them, what they are, information about them, and all the different types of questions you can get about them in 9 minutes. Some final things before we go. If you need any other help, there are videos for every little bit of Area of Study 1 on this YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, playlist there, check it out. If you want help from myself or other teachers, you can leave a comment below to get help from myself or email me. My email is in the description below, or you could join a bunch of other economics teachers and students on a Discord, which you can find a link to on my website, which is www.therunningeconomy.com, where you can also find a whole bunch of resources that might help you, as well as blogs that give a lot of hints and tips about a lot of VC economics based stuff. On that, I hope you are having a wonderful lockdown, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.